So thank you for joining our webinar. In terms of a few housekeeping announcements, we are recording this webinar and we'll be making it available to all registrants within a few days. All the slides will also be available on our website. If you want to ask a question during the webinar, please submit it via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And we'll be going through those and picking questions to ask. I don't think we'll be able to get to all the questions, but we'll do our best. And then you can talk with each other using the chat button at the bottom of your screen, but use the Q&A for questions. We'll be primarily monitoring Q&A for the questions. With that, I'd like to introduce our speakers. I'm Steve Nadell. I'm ACEEE's Executive Director. So I'll be moderating and also talking a little bit about the study that ACEEE released today, co-authored with Leila Fadali, who will also be talking about it. Then we have Josh Quinnell, a senior research engineer at the Center for Energy and the Environment. They're based in Minneapolis or the Twin Cities, and they'll be talking about a lot of work that they have done in that cold climate on decarbonization. And then Ann Evans, who's the CEO of Elevate Energy based in Chicago, will talk about their work, the particular emphasis on multifamily housing and decarbonization. So with that, let's launch into a little bit about ACEEE's brand new study. I'm waiting for the slides to come up. Okay, so our study is an analysis of electric and gas decarbonization options for homes and apartments. In this study, we can go to the next slide. We looked at a variety of options for decarbonizing homes and apartments by 2050, whether it's an electric option, such as a whole home heat pump or mini split heat pumps, whether it's a hybrid option, such as a heat pump with a fuel backup for when the weather gets cold, whether it is largely decarbonized fuels, whether it's biogas or green hydrogen. And then if we are using these decarbonized fuels, using them with various types of heating equipment, whether it's a furnace, a gas heat pump, or a boiler. Okay, next. One of the key variables in our study was to look what prices to use for electricity and fuel. We started with, for each home, we had individual prices back in 2015 based on their local rate structure, their local consumption, et cetera. We adjusted those for changes in the national electricity prices estimated by the Energy Information Administration. But we just used local prices plus that adjustment. We did not use this national figure for anyone. And another adjustment we made is north of 4,000 heating degree days, which is roughly Maryland on north. We added more for winter peak demand to meet the increased need for power based on heat pumps. We have our low, medium, and high price. Most of what we'll be discussing is on the medium. And likewise for gas prices, again, we have home-specific prices, but we adjusted them for changes for EIA. At the far left, you can see what EIA says is the national residential price retail. Towards the middle, the 2040, we looked at 2040 prices. They project would be very similar for fossil gas. But then to that, we added how much more will it cost for biogas and green hydrogen? And also if many people switch to electric heat pumps, what will that do to distribution charges? And you could see here that instead of costing maybe just over $10 a million BTUs, in our medium case, the alternative gas, counting both the fuel and the distribution charges, are nearly $40, so more than a factor of 3 higher than present prices. Next. Some other key assumptions come equipment costs. I won't read them all, but those are where some of them come from. We use an 18-year equipment life for space heating, 13 for water heaters, and a 5% real discount rate to discount future expenditures to the present. Next. One of the key variables we used is heating degree days. This is a map showing average heating degree days in the US 2006 to 2020. We particularly will be focusing on 4,000 heating degree day line. So that's roughly at the Ohio-Kentucky boundary or the Washington, D.C., Maryland boundary. And we'll be looking at the 6,000 heating degree day line, which is just south of Detroit, or the line between Boston, which is below 6,000 heating degree days, and Worcester, Massachusetts, which is above. Next slide. And with that, let me turn it over to Leila Fadali, who, along with me, co-wrote this. She's a senior analyst in our buildings program. Leila?
Thanks, Steve. So this is looking at our actual results here. This is about 2,000 homes that used gas furnaces in REX 2015. Each home appears twice, once as a blue square and once as a pink diamond for when we analyzed it with the electric heat pump, and once for the gas furnace. It's great to see all the data points here. You can see like the exceptions to the trend, outliers out here, but it's hard to process that with 4 different options. So for many of our figures, we only have the best fit lines showing the correlation between heating degree days and life cycle cost. The other thing I'll draw your attention to here is this gap in the electric heat pump lines is the increase in cost for the cold climate heat pumps starting at 4,000 heating degree days. So here are, considering the results as results, you can see that below about 6,000 heating degree days, we found that generally electric air source heat pumps were the lowest cost option here. Above that, hybrid systems where there is a gas backup below 5 degrees Fahrenheit were the lowest cost option. Out here we have gas heat pumps, but those are based on like 5 different homes. So I would take that with a couple of tablespoons of salt. We considered how the results would vary if we used different levels of prices for electricity and gas. So our main analysis was the central square here. And you can see if we used high gas prices instead, then only in the very coldest places would the gas heat pump edge out the electric heat pump. If, on the other hand, you use low gas prices, then it would shift over a bit. But basically, we have the same picture for all of these, where the electric air source heat pump was the lowest cost option, just depending on where that line was drawn for the most part. For oil furnaces, and this is a smaller set of homes, and I'll just kind of lump these together. Gas boilers, also a smaller set of homes, but very strong results here. Here we were looking at air to water heat pumps instead of air source heat pumps. Considering the effect of energy efficiency, so readjust your mind here. These are all lines for electric air source heat pumps, but just with different energy efficiency options for the home. You can see that below about 4,000 heating degree days, we found that the energy efficiency did not really work out. But in colder areas, shaving off some of that winter peak was well worthwhile. We separately considered the half of homes that had space conditioning bills above the median, and you can see that it's more favorable in these circumstances, including in colder places. Our deep retrofit package, which was 60% energy savings, but pretty substantial cost, that came in better, looking better than the no efficiency option for colder climates. This is the same thing for condensing gas furnaces. Looks pretty, it's actually looks even a little bit better than it does for the electric heat pumps. Those alternative fuels are very expensive, so using less of them makes them a bit more competitive. We separately considered gas furnaces for 2 to 4 family buildings and 5 or more family buildings. Generally similar results to what we found for single family. Here for 5 or more units, you can see that below 4,000 heating degree days, the purely electric heat pump was the lowest cost option, probably above 6,000 heating degree days. The hybrid was the lowest cost option. In between, we found that perhaps there could be an opportunity for gas furnaces, though I will note that this is a smaller sample size than others. Gas boilers, central gas boiler, large multifamily buildings with central gas boilers were kind of the exception to our rule. You can see our electric options here, the electric VRF and mini split heat pumps up top here. We modeled very high cost for electrification in these buildings. We did also consider what it would be like if we used the same installation costs, the same equipment costs for what we had for single family homes, and that brought the mini splits down to the level of like the, sort of competitive with the gas boilers. But I will leave to others to speak to the challenge of bringing those costs down. Considering the effective energy efficiency here, you can see it doesn't much change the results for the gas and oil boilers using alternative fuels. It does significantly bring down the cost of electrification, but not really enough to change the results here. These maps are aggregated across all of our home types and system types, heating systems. And you can see that in the West and South, we have an overwhelming majority of homes where the purely electric heat pump was the lowest cost option on the top map here. And on the bottom, this is looking at hybrid systems, and in these more northerly areas where we modeled more of those systems, pluralities, and in New England, even a majority of those were the lowest cost option. Considering water heating, these box plots are showing this decline as the median, and the boxes, the first and third quartiles. So you can see the electric heat pump water heaters have by far the lowest cost of all these options. But what you maybe can't tell in this figure is that these outliers here correspond to these outliers for the other system types. So in fact, for every single home that we analyzed, the electric heat pump water heater had the lowest cost. For everything that I've talked about up to this point, the homes were just homes, not representing anything, but REX is meant to be a nationally representative sample of homes, and EIA has weighting factors that you can use to make the full data set represent the national housing stock. So we did that for these 8 different scenarios, each scenario kind of built on the last one. So like scenario 5 is scenario 4 with some additional assumptions. Basically, those assumptions are sort of a summary of the results that we found that I was talking about up to this point. You put them all together, then our lowest cost option was this last one. I can't really spend more time on it than that, but these slides will be available after the webinar, and these are all figures from the report. So with that, I will hand it back to Steve. Take us away.
Okay, so just to briefly summarize, I'm not going to read all these words, but for 1 to 4 family homes, we find that using electric heat pumps below approximately 6,000 heating degree days minimizes life cycle costs, whereas above 6,000, it will be hybrid. We do recommend, to address one of the questions, we assumed use of cold climate heat pumps north of 4,000 heating degree days. We know they're not that common, but in order to reduce the costs of meeting a winter peaks, we recommend cold climate heat pumps north of 4,000. So next slide. Energy efficiency often reduces life cycle costs, particularly the moderate efficiency package, which, to answer another question, is based on home performance with Energy Star savings and cost data. But for certain types of homes, deep retrofits may make sense if they're heated with oil and propane, if they have above average energy use, or they're in very cold climates. And I would note that the efficiency both helps reduce the winter peak and helps people be comfortable in cold temperatures, and also in the case of a fuel, helps minimize the amount of fuel because the fuel is quite expensive. Next. Multifamily buildings, as Leila pointed out, for buildings with warm air heating with furnaces, results are fairly similar to the single family. But if you have a boiler, a central boiler, the costs of retrofitting with air source heat pumps is quite high. And we found that it will often be cheaper to do a condensing boiler with a decarbonized fuel. But Anne may comment on that. The data is very limited. And next. And then heat pump water heaters generally make the most sense for water heating. With that, I very briefly looked at some of the Q&A. I'm going to very quickly go over a few things to clarify things and take just a minute or two to do it before letting Josh speak. We accidentally skipped one of the slides. Our basic data set is the EIA Residential Energy Consumption Survey, where we had detailed data on nearly 3,000 homes that now use fossil fuels, so natural gas, propane, fuel oil. We analyzed each one of those homes separately, and that's was the main data source. In the main report, and I think which is on ACEEE's website, it got released this morning. We have all the data sources, all the details. We also are making available on the web the detailed data on each of these nearly 3,000 homes at low, medium, and high assumptions. So if anybody wants to look at or play with the data, they can. We did raise the gas price to consider renewable natural gas. In the case of electricity, by and large, the renewable energy is coming in at similar, if not lower costs than the present cost. So we didn't add an adjustment for solar. We did add an adjustment for addressing winter peaks, which can be substantial. There was a 30% adder, for example, in Minnesota. Our study did include some internal wiring. We went with the midpoint. If it had a central air conditioner already, we said switching to a heat pump probably wasn't going to need new internal wiring, but if it didn't have a central air conditioner, we did include costs for that. Someone noted that the recent gas prices are higher. Yes, they are, but we're figuring much higher still with the decarbonized fuel. What the future natural gas price will be, who knows, but I totally agree. Costs are higher now, but we looked at 2030 and beyond. Details on our heat pump efficiency are in the report, but we used a detailed analysis by the Florida Solar Energy Center that helps estimate the exact seasonal efficiency as a function of design temperature. So the efficiency is much higher in Orlando than it is in Duluth, Minnesota. We did briefly present the low, medium, and high prices. These are national averages, and again, these were adjustments to home-specific heights in CPEX. Someone noted that Cincinnati is right on the border. We generally find above or below 4,000 heating degree days, heat pumps make sense. Where it generally suggests a hybrid system is north of 6,000 heating degree days. So I think that's quite a bit north of Cincinnati. We'll get to more questions later. I just wanted to quickly go through a few of them before turning it over to Josh. So Josh, you can take it away, please.
Thanks, Steve. As you mentioned, I'm from Center for Energy and Environment. We're a Minnesota-based clean energy nonprofit that delivers practical energy solutions for homes, businesses, and communities in the upper Midwest. So I'm in research at CE, and right now we're sort of laser focused on space heating decarbonization, and specifically for natural gas. So I pretty much zeroed in on that part of the report, and I thought up front here I'd just share some of my high-level reactions. So it's really a very timely report from my perspective. Right now, a lot of us researchers and implementers are really grappling with the cost and the performance and the capacity limits of air source heat pumps in cold climates and what that means for our relatively aggressive decarbonization goals. From my perspective, this study kind of removes itself from these very near-term issues to sort of help level set what our decision logic might look out in the future. You know, when we're installing heat pumps in 2030, I think particularly with respect to space heating electrification. And I think the space heating results here are very reasonable. They sort of reflect what we've found to date. They reflect the barriers we're currently dealing with in very cold climates. Actually, what's super encouraging to me is that sort of carbon Neutral synthetic fuels show something of a cost parity to renewable electricity for space heating in cold climates. To me, this speaks to what I think will be a crucial flexibility we need to make space heating decarbonization possible, sort of on these timelines. And I'm not really sure that's currently appreciated by everyone kind of working in this space. Secondly, I think the work finds that results are sort of insensitive to electric and gas rates that are going to move in tandem in the future. I agree with that. I think it's probably the long-term trajectory. But it's especially important thing to keep in mind right now, as we're essentially trying to exploit asymmetric differences in utility rates. For example, gas rates are constant in Minnesota, but electric rates vary by maybe 30%. And we have dual fuel rates and special electric heating rates with even bigger differences. So this does impact our current outcomes, but I think by looking into the future, this report highlights for me that maybe exploiting some of these current rate dynamics may not be sustainable in the long run, and we should really keep that in mind as we try to promote various space heating options. Third, I think it's important to acknowledge in this report we get very high. This report assumes very high performance out of our heat pumps. We know from the field that this heat pump performance is attainable, but I wouldn't say it's average yet. Most systems today are less, probably on the order of 30% when we look at seasonal COPs in cold climates. And there's also a large variance across installs. So some heat pumps are achieving these figures, some are 30 or 50% less. Frankly, this is pretty unacceptable level of uncertainty. So we really need to keep up the effort on fieldwork for air source heat pumps, especially as more products flood the market and try to distinguish themselves from other products. We need to kind of figure out how to get this high performance, but we also need a better understanding of why heat pumps perform the way they do. So eventually we can prescribe high performance installations that meet these seasonal COPs, and also we can provide good forecasts so we can understand customer bills and peak load impacts. Lastly, for me, the most important part or result in this report is really zeroing in on the Energy Star performance and deep energy retrofit results. Not only does this envelope efficiency work, I'll call it, generally lower lifetime costs in very cold climates, but there's lots of relatively low-hanging fruit. I think this report refers to them as the above median bills group. This is really consistent with our work on Minnesota building stock, which shows that we should really be weatherizing like crazy. And in a lot of cases, the economics does justify going a lot further into deep energy retrofit territory. My hope, I guess, is that this report helps to elevate that building envelope work can play in a decarbonization of very cold climate homes. But also that it plays that role regardless of which space heating path we decide to take. So now I guess it's time to show why I locked into these specific aspects of this report and share with you some of the work that we have going on here at CEE. Can you see my slides? I'll assume so. So one thing I want to mention is we run a Minnesota Air Source Heat Pump Collaborative. This is sort of a joint effort with Minnesota utilities to promote air source heat pump adoption across Minnesota. We have a new program that's just starting right now called the Minnesota Energy Technology Accelerator. This name will change. Bonus points if you can identify why. This is a new Minnesota market transformation program with a starter portfolio that does feature dual fuel heat pumps or hybrid heating systems. So we'll be pursuing that right out of the gate. And then I mentioned I'm in the research department. We have a lot of ongoing research into air source heat pumps. It's really sort of our main effort right now. We're doing a variety of market research and modeling work, specifically looking at heat pumps as air conditioner replacements, pure efficiency measures. We're looking at customer bill impact calculators and doing analysis for dual fuel systems, all electric systems, whole house electrification systems. And then our bread and butter really is still field research. And we're doing a lot of field research on air source heat pumps right now. We're monitoring all electric single family installations, all electric multifamily installations. We're monitoring air to water heat pump systems. We're also monitoring dual fuel or hybrid heat pump systems that feature exclusively variable heat pump systems. And then I guess to continue the self-promotion, we have a couple of upcoming things that feature some of the work I was just talking about. The first thing is next week, actually, maybe Thursday, we'll be releasing summary findings of a Minnesota Department of Commerce funded research into heat pumps as central air conditioning replacement measures. And then a bunch of us will be at ACEEE summer study here in about a month, presenting a lot of other papers that are really well aligned with the results of this report. So near and dear to my heart is a paper we're calling "It's All About the Envelope," prioritizing envelope upgrades for electrification of cold climate homes. Sort of a direct link here with what was found in this report. Similarly, we're going to be talking about electric rates and how currently they can dictate outcomes of space heating electrification in the upper Midwest. And then lastly, also be sharing why we should never install another air conditioner again. So that's the work that we're doing right now. We're really happy to see the results of this report. It's really well aligned with everything that we're working on. I think it gives us sort of a target to keep in mind as we pursue heat pump research over the next half a decade.
Okay. Thank you very much, Josh. I'm not seeing questions for you. I would encourage people when we get to the Q&A session to also include questions for Josh and Anne. But with that, let me turn it over to Anne.
Thank you. And hello, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here with all of you and on this journey as we all learn together about building decarbonization. And congratulations, Steve, to you issuing this really impressive report. So I'm going to talk today about Elevate and our work that we've been doing in building decarbonization. We work in both single family and multifamily, but I'm going to take you from the sort of meta-analysis that's been presented so far and share with you some particulars about individual buildings and our experience. So Elevate is a nonprofit. You can see we work around the country, a lot in the Midwest and Pacific Northwest, and I am joining you today from Chicago. We seek to create a world where everyone has clean, affordable heat, power, and cooling, especially with the extreme heat we are experiencing across the country, and water in their homes, no matter who they are or where they live. We implement programs with a particular focus on affordable housing. We've done clean energy upgrades in over 100,000 units of affordable housing. Our retrofits are broad. We address health. We include renewables. We address also, we include demand response. And so it's not only how much are you consuming, but when are you consuming those? And then it is incredibly important to us that we are building a diverse workforce so that everyone can participate in the clean energy economy. So we work to recruit BIPOC contractors and people from BIPOC communities to be able to be involved in doing these upgrades. I'm going to talk to you about some projects we've been doing in Chicago, Madison, and Detroit, and actually really across the state of Wisconsin, and focus in on one building in particular to just give you a sense of the impact of, in this particular case, building decarbonization on this one multifamily property on Chicago's northwest side. We think a lot in terms of housing typology and agree with the findings that electrification as a approach does not work everywhere for every building type at this point in time. But we have started with a very common multifamily building typology. In fact, if I look out my window, I can see several of these very same buildings all around me. This is 44 units, very affordable, as you can see, to people with 50% of the area median income and even 30% of the area median income. This is owned by a nonprofit affordable housing developer. This building has not been upgraded since the 90s. It is heated by we're halfway through this project, so half the building is all of the building precondition was that the building was heated with gas forced hot air ducted systems that are at end of life. So this building owner was faced with the decision of, given that I have to upgrade all our systems, what do I want to do at this point in time moving forward? The owner also shares some sustainability and climate goals. So in the unit, we had gas stoves and gas furnaces. In common areas, we had gas hot water heaters and gas-fired clothes dryers. The approach that we took to upgrade, again, this is a building with systems that were end of life, to upgrade the building equipment and systems were to convert space heating to heat pumps, water heating to heat pumps, and then appliances to all electric sources. We made the decision not to use induction stoves, and I'm happy to jump into that if there are questions about it. I think I saw a question on this related to the need to upgrade electrical service to be able to support these new added electrical loads, and that was required both to common area accounts as well as to individual units as well, and that was a substantial cost. And I think this speaks to the costly nature of some of these retrofits. This slide shows you on the left pre and post energy consumption by end use, and on the right pre and post cost by end use. So you can see that the energy consumption or EUI of the building overall goes significantly down, but costs are not, utility costs are not the same. We took a principle of making sure that the options that we provided would reduce utility costs for tenants. And I promise you this is my last slide so we can move to questions. On the left, we showed utility costs pre, the pre-baseline for both common area in orange and tenants in green, and post common area. You see the common area costs go up. That is because of the DHW, domestic hot water use, and tenant costs go down. We are adding rooftop solar to this project as well to address the increase in common area costs. And I will just say from a tenant perspective, we did a lot of tenant engagement as part of this project. And the thing that was the most significant driver for tenants was one, going from having 2 utility bills to manage to only 1 utility bill to manage. But even more important for them is the addition of cooling. So this is a building that did not have cooling prior to the upgrade, and I think we cannot underestimate the value of providing cooling as we continue to experience these extreme heat events. And with that, Steve, I will pass it back to you and look forward to answering questions.
Okay, thank you very much. And I am quickly trying to go through the questions. And we'll start with you, Anne. We do have a few questions for you, then I'll go to Josh, and then we'll come back to some additional questions on our study. And there was a little confusion about whether the building initially had air conditioning. It sounded like you did include air conditioning in the retrofit.
Yeah, preconditioned, there was no air conditioning, and this is not common, especially in affordable housing that was built or renovated in the 80s and 90s. At that point in time, cooling was considered a luxury. I think we can now all agree that cooling is a necessity.
Yeah, exactly. We were asked, what did you do with cooking since you are not using induction stoves?
Yeah, we looked into this and we did a lot of tenant engagement, asking people what their preferences were. And we were expecting that there was going to either be a preference for cooking with gas or induction stoves. What we learned is that people's preference was based on how they grew up. So if they grew up cooking with electric coil, that was their preference. If they grew up cooking with gas, that was their preference. However, the desire to have new appliances and electric was definitely a driver. We determined, also talking to building owners and doing research with our folks around the country, that in a rental situation, you might want to think twice before using induction stoves, because the repair of induction stoves is not insignificant, as well as the issue of course, of the pots that people use, and that it was a more cost-effective option to use electric coil, high efficiency electric coil stoves with ceramic tops. Again, this is in a rental context where you have a tenant turnover.
Okay, thanks. I'll come back to you in a few minutes. Josh, a few questions for you. What is the design temperature at the places that you talked about? And do you use the 99%, actually 99% design temperature, 99.6? What is the temperatures and what do you use?
This is a very good question. It's very near and dear to my heart. It actually depends on the application. So when we're talking about dual fuel applications, we kind of remove that complexity from air source heat pump speccing and design. However, in looking at all electric applications, it becomes very tricky. I tend to look at the 99.6 values. That's something like -11 in the Twin Cities and -22 up north, Thief River Falls, Fahrenheit. So very cold temperatures. In practice, though, it doesn't make a lot of sense to try to size heat pumps to meet loads in those conditions. They do occur, but they occur infrequently enough that we should consider essentially hybridizing with electric resistance. So use the heat pump capacity to the extent you can and top off with electric resistance. You still get an efficiency benefit. It's a lot more cost effective than the heat pump. But this raises one of the central issues, which is sizing heat pumps for cold snaps is extremely difficult. Even in Minnesota, the 99.6 temperature in Twin Cities can be exceeded by 10 degrees. So it can get to be -20 here for 2 days straight. If you've sized your system for the design load, you might run into troubles when it's -20 for 2 days straight. That's not a problem we have with gas furnaces because they're very easy to oversize and there's essentially no consequences. But these details are really important for determining how heat pumps actually work in extreme situations, and we have to be very mindful of them.
Yeah, and I will use that response to answer a couple of questions that we got. In our study, we assumed that the heat pump would operate down to 5 degrees F, but beyond that, it would go to a backup. Why 5? It was based on the DOE Cold Climate Heat Pump Challenge, where they are looking for equipment to provide full output down to 5 degrees. Below that, yes, efficiency goes down, but also the heating capacity goes down. And so we thought that was a good switchover temperature. Each property, each weather will be different, but when you're looking at nearly 3,000 homes, that was the simplifying assumption we used. And it just so happens that a design temperature below 5 degrees about correlates to 6,000 heating degree days. Not perfectly, but it was incredibly close correlation on that. I would also note in response to one of the questions, our study was entirely on retrofits, existing homes, existing level of insulation, existing fuel bills, et cetera. New construction, it's much easier to convert to heat pumps. Josh, you may want to mention a recent project where in the Twin Cities where you got well over 90% of the heat from a heat pump, but it was very well insulated. Likewise, I know Efficiency Vermont is doing new homes just with a heat pump and a very small electric resistance backup coil. Again, new construction, you could build it. But Josh, why don't you comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I've assumed, and I think pretty good field data to indicate that heat pumps in new construction make sense. We can make it work even in the coldest of climates. We just have so much more to work with good envelopes, essentially. It's really a retrofit challenge. 70% of our buildings are old, and those are the buildings that we're going to have to work on to make heat pumps work.
Right. Another question for Anne is how much in this Wisconsin building, how much did it cost for the electrical upgrade? Do you recall that, or are you going to have to look it up? You are muted.
Thank you. Sorry, let me phone a friend and get the exact number for you. It was substantial. It was several $1,000s per unit. And this was a Chicago building. But we've run into the same issues in Detroit and Madison. The electric service upgrades are not insignificant. They're substantial, and in the 10 to 20% of total project cost range, I would say. But I will phone a friend and get an actual cost for you.
Okay, just to respond to a few more questions on ours before I go back to Josh. We accidentally skipped a slide. For buildings with boilers, we looked at an air to water heat pump. These are 1 to 4 family, not the central systems. We for the multifamily buildings, we looked at either mini splits or a VRF system. Yes, there are other more centralized systems. We didn't look at them because those are so site specific that it was tough to come up with a representative cost. For that reason, we also didn't do ground source heat pumps. Can be a very useful technology, but you don't just do a cookie cutter. It's very site specific. So that's why we couldn't do that. I would note, as someone noted, there's some window heat pumps. Yes, those are very promising, just starting to come out. We did not look at those. We looked at either mini splits or VRF. There's always more work that can be done. Let's see.
I'd love to jump in. I do have friends,
Please. Fortunately,
and someone on my team is on the call. Thank you, Maria Quinones. The costs are coming in these, are across multiple projects across the 3 cities between $1,500 and $3,000 per unit are the costs for electrical upgrades.
Okay. Question for Josh. Someone from New England is asking, do you think your results in Minnesota will apply in New England?
Yeah, very much so. I think there's sort of a direct application in the climate zone 6 and 7 portions of New England. But I would also say that even stretching down into the southern reaches, Massachusetts, basically, just due to their older building stock, that the results are just as applicable to sort of that climate zone 5 as they are in Minnesota.
Right. I would note, as a former New Englander, Minnesota by and large gets colder than New England. You have to go to pretty northern Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine to start getting Minnesota temperatures. So it might be a little easier in much of New England. A few other things. I haven't been able to look at the chat, but Nick, could you put the link in the chat to where people can access the full study or the press release? Thank you. There was a question about aren't all heat pump retrofits dual fuel? I would say in cold climates, they often are, but in warmer climates, no. People can just switch to a heat pump, particularly if they're replacing an air conditioner, already, then they can install a heat pump. They may not need a backup. The questioner happen to know is from New Hampshire. Yes, in your area, generally there will be a backup. I'm going to ask one general question for everybody from the Q&A. Do people have any concerns about the move to electrification, thus increasing demand, getting ahead of supply in the short run? And I'm not clear whether it's heat pump supply or electrical supply. So people could answer it either way or both. Someone want to take a stab at that?
Go ahead, Josh.
Okay. That is not very high on my radar. I think we're still trying to accelerate things at a rate to get where we need to be by 2030 or 2040. And we're still so far away from, at least in our region, heat pumps really having any kind of impact on utility electricity supply since we're summer peaking, that this is a future problem. I think we need to see something on the order of 25% of full electric heat pump adoption before we wouldn't have the capacity here in Minnesota to serve that load. And that's right now, that seems very far away. And I think we still need several years to see how fast we're going to get to that pivot.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Josh, on the electrical capacity question. Of course, that's going to depend on your region and how what your capacity markets are like, but we operate in similar markets where we have sufficient capacity generally, so that won't be a problem for some time. On the other question, which is the supply of heat pump equipment, that is definitely a challenge. The supply chain issues that we are experiencing are real. They are driving up costs for projects, and they are causing delays in project implementation. And I hope somebody on this webinar has some vision into how long that those delays will happen, because I do not.
Right. I will add, I've talked to some manufacturers and they are working on it. I guess to paraphrase what I've heard, certainly within a year they should be resolved. They're hoping for sooner, but I haven't heard anybody promising sooner. I've heard such things as some manufacturers are wondering whether to start their own chip line, as an example. How do they deal with some of these issues and bring them internal? But yes, it is a major problem, perhaps for the next year, but we'll all see. One of the questions was about decarbonized fuel, and let me explain that a little bit more. This is in our study. We looked at both biogas as well as green hydrogen that then would get made into synthetic fuel. They are not 100% carbon-free, but they are extremely low carbon. And yes, there's lots of debate about, leakage, etc. But those are the fuels that we looked at. So I don't say fully decarbonized, I'll say nearly. Likewise, for the electric grid, we didn't look at 100% electric grid. Going from 90% to 100% renewables can be challenging. It was mostly decarbonized without getting into trying to figure out how expensive would it be to supply 100% of a grid with renewable energy or nuclear or something like that. So that's what we did. Someone noted, is there a need for policies? And I would say absolutely. Layla, if you could bring up the slide, we accidentally skipped one on programs and policies, but we're not magically going to switch over to decarbonized fuels without policy. fuels and electricity that produce carbon are cheaper, and that people are going to use them unless there are some policies driving them. And I'm not seeing that coming up yet. So we'll wait a minute and it will come up. While we're waiting for that, Anne, I was going to ask you a question. I know when we were doing the research, you noted, I'll ask you and then we'll come back to this. You noted that in Chicago, the fixed costs for gas service are very high, and so that you might be an exception to the general trend we found that even with higher gas prices, that may make sense. But if you have a very high fixed price for an apartment, that could really be enormous. Do you want to elaborate a little and/or comment? Did I get it not quite right?
Sure. And so I, as we look at utility bills, there's often a supply charge and a delivery charge, and in some utility service territories, those fixed costs or delivery costs can be substantial. That is something that we experience in areas where we work, and so getting rid of those fixed costs does make it cost positive for in some situations, as we mentioned, very commonly in the single family context, and for some kinds of multifamily where which are already individually heated, and tenants are paying their own gas and electric bills. And I just also wanted to clarify, because I saw a question in the chat, the costs for tenants post retrofit did go down by several $100s a year. So it is cost positive for tenants in this particular situation that I presented today.
Right. Okay, going to the slide that Leila is showing. So the report goes into more detail, but we do recommend continued research and development to continue to improve and bring down the cost of these various decarbonization technologies. There's a need for education and marketing on the benefits of all these approaches, whether it's for the consumers, but also for the trade allies. Minimum efficiency standards, we need, particularly on the heat pumps, very high efficiencies really help. Likewise, they help, higher efficiencies help on the gas side as well. Incentives and grants, those have been mainstays of electrification and decarbonization. They will continue. There are some issues with rates, and do we change rates? At this point, there can be very high fixed costs, and they often do not vary with how much consumption. Should we reconsider whether they are ignore consumption, whether we have an all electric rate, or likewise on the gas side? We have to be careful, because you don't want to stick the poor with higher fixed costs, but is there room to reconsider how we allocate those fixed costs? We looked at also, and we include a little summary about clean heat standards, such as Florida and Minnesota are now doing. And I don't know if Josh wants to say anything about that in a second. Minnesota is voluntary, whereas Colorado is mandatory. And then, of course, some type of price on carbon. Before I turn it to Josh, I was just going to answer one more question. Is the goal decarbonization or electrification? Our study specifically looked at decarbonization. We did look at electrifying, but we also looked at these nearly decarbonized fuels. Most of the time, electrification makes sense, but you do want some decarbonized fuels, particularly in very cold climates as backup, and perhaps in centrally heated multifamily with boilers is what we found. But Josh, why don't you go say something about the Minnesota? I'm calling it a clean heat standard. It's not quite in Minnesota, but you might be able to say a little something about that.
I actually don't know what you're referring to.
Oh,
do you know it by name?
it was the bill that passed a little over a year ago, where gas utilities are encouraged but not required to come up with proposed decarbonization plan.
I got it. Okay, the Natural Gas Innovation Act. Yeah, this is really encouraging work. We're still essentially waiting for gas utilities to put forward their plans, but the expectation is that they will be kind of working both on the supply and the demand side to figure out how to decarbonize. And we expect most of the resources will be devoted towards essentially developing decarbonized fuels or lowering the carbon inputs into their delivered fuel streams, but they also will have the opportunity to do things like deep energy retrofits and potentially even put in heat pumps. So it's kind of like this all-encompassing opportunity for gas utilities to participate in decarbonization in whatever form that takes.
A couple of other questions, and Anne, you may want to start with this one. Is there any significant benefit to replacing gas with induction as opposed to electric resistant smooth stop?
Yes. I mean, you're definitely your consumption for cooking will go down if you're using induction stoves, and I think for a single family context, it's particularly owner occupied context, it may be preferable, even though they remain expensive, although I believe the cost will come down. So it may make sense to use induction stoves in the single family owner occupied context or condo context. And I would just say that from our experience, in the low affordable housing rental space, the electric coil stoves make more sense from a maintenance point of view. So when you're weighing operating costs and maintenance costs, that is something that we consider.
Okay, have a couple of last questions before we ramp up. Question for Josh. Considering that heat pumps should be used in almost all homes and rolled out as quickly as possible. Oops, somebody. All of a sudden it moved on me. Sorry, it moved and I can't find it. We'll have to come back to that one.
I think I read that question. I may be able to just answer it. I think the end of the question was about how to get, consider that we probably also have to move to low global warming potential refrigerants in these systems. And I would just say, this isn't to answer about how we do it, but our market transformation program that we're starting right now is a good example of how we can look at these kind of long-term issues and try and push manufacturers in the direction of supplying the equipment that we need, but also doing it in a way that respects sort of some of the future challenges we're going to have, namely that our current refrigerants are going to cause problems and very high incidences. So I think this is a good call out for the potential of market transformation programs that can work directly with manufacturers to apply pressure on behalf of our sustainability goals.
Okay. Let's see. Lila, there's a question for you on rate projections. Do you take into account that everyone will be trying to do these projects at the same time?
So it's mostly is at the same time, but just as a simplifying assumption, but for homes that it's depends on if homes have air conditioning or not. So, and it depends on whether you're talking about our scenario with fuels or our scenario with electrification. So for electrification, we assume that the heat pump is installed when the air conditioner needs to be replaced. If the home has an air conditioner in 2015. But if it doesn't have an air conditioner, then we assume that it's installed when the heating system needs to be replaced. I think that covers it. So it's basically, there's like a 5-year difference depending on whether it's installed in 2030 or 2035, depending on whether there's air conditioning. but basically we don't have any complicated assumptions about the pricing in that way, unless Steve, you incorporated something that I don't know about.
No, it was relatively simple. I'm going to take one comment as the final one, which is that the grid is struggling with congestion and constraints today. Do we really need a lot more electric load? The heating load is often generally a lot greater than the cooling load, particularly once you get north of Texas. Yes, that is a major constraint, which is why we really advocate backup in cold climates, why we say you really should do the efficiency as much as possible. We did, I know, Josh, your organization has done a lot, and we actually did a paper 2 years ago looking at what was the peak demand impacts of the polar vortex from 2019 if everybody had a heat pump. It would have been enormous. But when we did efficiency, demand response, fuel backup, we kept it down to a moderate level. But yes, we assumed that it will result in higher electricity costs from 4,000 heating degree days north, 30% in Minnesota, less if it's a little warmer, even more in Alaska. And I'm not sure I'd recommend a heat pump outside of anywhere north of Anchorage. But yes, those are big issues and we need to deal with them. We cannot sweep them under the carpet. And I'm sure there'll be lots more discussion on these issues. This is our attempt to provide some facts and data about what makes sense where, based on various assumptions. But as I noted, look at the full report. If you want to get into it, we also, on the website, we have detailed data for the high and low cases, so you can play with the data that you want there. We recognize that the future is unknown and we made our best attempts, but other people may do something differently. So with that, I wanted to thank everybody for participating. I wanted to thank Anne, Josh, and Layla for their help. And we'll look at the questions. I'm not sure there's well over 100. We'll be able to get to all of them. But hopefully we got a lot of them and we'll take a look to see if we can get back to a few more. So thank you very much. I hope you found this interesting. Please look at the report. Please continue to follow the work of Elevate and Minnesota Sea. And we're all ultimately trying to work toward decarbonization, but in a way that is technically feasible and that works economically, particularly for low, moderate income households who we don't want to screw. So with that, thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye.